She stood in front of the board, heart pounding, surrounded by laughter. Her teacher thought it was a joke. Her classmates thought she would fail. But when she started typing, the entire school went silent. What began as an attempt to humiliate a quiet black girl turned into a moment that would rewrite an entire system. This is not just a story about code. This is the story of the line they couldn't delete. You're watching Story Flow, where every voice has power. Subscribe never to miss a story like this. The bell had barely finished ringing when the door to room 214 creaked open. Amara Johnson stood in the doorway, her breathing shallow, fingers clenched tightly around the strap of her worn-out backpack. Her faded and 2 sizes too big hoodie hung off her frame like a shield. The hum of classroom chatter died as all eyes turned toward her, followed by the unmistakable tap-tap-tap of Ms. Heather Crowley's heels approaching the front of the room. Late again, Miss Johnson, Missy, Crowley said, without even turning to face her. Her tone was smooth but sharp, like a blade sheathed in velvet. Care to explain today's excuse? I'm sorry, Amara murmured, stepping inside. It won't happen again. Crowley spun to face her, arms folded. Her eyes flicked over Amara's clothes, her tired posture, and her hesitance. You said that last week, she said coolly, and the week before that. I suggest you start taking this class seriously if you ever hope to pass it. Amara stopped herself, her mouth opened, then closed again. May I stand for class today? A pause, then silence. It was the kind of silence that freezes the air. Crowley raised a sculpted eyebrow, her voice laced with something more poisonous than anger, mockery. Excuse me, my back hurts. Amara said, a little louder this time. It hurts when I sit too long. Several students snickered. The kind of laughter that isn't loud, but sharp, cutting. Crowley's lips curved into a cruel smile. How convenient, she said, circling slowly toward the whiteboard. We live in an age of miracles. Class, here we have a student who arrives late, fails to turn in assignments, and now claims she's too injured to sit. What should we do? Applaud her resilience. A few students laughed. Amara looked down at the floor, wishing it would swallow her whole. She didn't dare mention the bruises on her lower back, the ones left behind by an accidental shove during gym class that no one witnessed, or perhaps simply ignored. She knew better than to try to explain. Crowley picked up a marker and, with flair, began writing an algorithm on the board. Lines of code, looping structures, a recursive function, and a neural net pattern for classification all beyond anything the class had ever studied. This, Crowley said, stepping back from the board with satisfaction, is a real-world coding problem. One was used at last summer's Stanford AI workshop. I wouldn't expect most of you to understand it, but since Miss Johnson has apparently evolved beyond the limitations of chairs, perhaps she can rise to the intellectual challenge as well. Gasps, whispers, then silence again. Amara's face flushed hot with embarrassment. Her fingers tingled. Her heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out the world. You may approach the board, Crowley said, or, if you'd prefer, take your seat and stop wasting my time. Amara didn't move. Some thought it was fear. Some thought it was pride. But what no one realized in that moment was that Amara wasn't paralyzed by doubt. She was simply scanning the problem and preparing her next move. Amara's fingers twitched at her sides. The lines of code on the board weren't unfamiliar. They weren't easy. But they weren't foreign. Her eyes scanned the nested loops, the input arrays, the recursive structure, and something in her brain clicked, not because of anything she had learned in class, but because of what she had taught herself in silence. While her classmates spent evenings scrolling through social media or gaming, Amara's world narrowed into one glowing screen. In a cramped 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother and baby brother, she'd curl up beside the radiator, headphones in, laptop balanced on her knees, internet from the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi, power from a frayed extension cord her mom had warned her not to overload, tutorials whispered through static, screens full of syntax errors, and yet she kept going. Her coding journey hadn't started with a dream of Silicon Valley or scholarships. It started with a question. One night, when her mother came home from her nursing assistant job, exhausted and coughing, Amara searched how to build an air quality sensor with code. From there, she stumbled into Arduino, then Python, then the sprawling world of machine learning, and it was in that world that she met Dr. Eliza Brooks. At first, she didn't even know who the woman was. Just another name in the comments section of an online open source forum. But Eliza was kind, patient, and when she noticed that Amara was solving problems adults struggled with, she reached out directly. "You remind me of myself." She wrote, "If you're serious, I'll help you, but it won't be easy." It wasn't, but Amara had grit. She couldn't afford tutors or boot camps, but she could download free PDF textbooks. She couldn't ask questions in class because she was invisible there, but she could post in forums at 2 a.m. She worked quietly, persistently, through weekends and sick days, through power outages and judgmental stares. She coded in laundromats. She debugged at the public library when the Wi-Fi was faster. Her mother didn't fully understand what she was doing, but she'd nod when Amara talked about algorithms, whispering, "As long as it keeps you safe, baby, keep going." And so, she did. Now, standing under the flickering fluorescent lights of room 214, with 25 students watching, and Ms. Crowley smirking at her presumed humiliation, Amara felt the familiar buzz of logic firing in her brain. The code was beatable, the problem was real, and the girl they underestimated was very, very real, too. A chair scraped loudly as Miss Crowley pulled it away from the front row and placed it beside her desk with theatrical precision. "If you won't sit in your proper seat, Miss Johnson," she announced, "you may stand here where everyone can witness your genius firsthand." The class erupted with nervous laughter. A boy in the back muttered, "This is going to be good," and several others leaned forward, phones angled low, ready to catch the spectacle. Amara heard the click of a recording app starting, but she wasn't thinking about them. She wasn't thinking about how cruel Ms. Crowley's smirk looked under the sterile light, or how her knees trembled from a mix of pain and fear. She was thinking in functions and logic trees, in if-then statements and array parsing. Her world narrowed to the whiteboard and the blinking cursor on the screen beside it. "Clock's ticking," Crowley said, tapping her wrist. Amara stepped forward, her breath shallow. She picked up the school-issued keyboard. Its spacebar was sticky, the keys stiff, but she placed her fingers on the home row like it was a piano and began to type. At first, the room remained loud. Jokes, whispers. Someone in the second row mimicked a countdown. But then, slowly, the sounds faded as the code began to grow. Not random fragments, not copied text. Real structure. She initialized the inputs, defined a function, set the loop for data analysis. Her syntax was clean. Her logic is precise. And line after line, the algorithm took shape. Silence fell like a curtain. Someone whispered, "Wait, she knows what she's doing." "Ms.?" Crowley's smirk wavered. In that moment, Amara wasn't just coding. She was surviving. Her pain dissolved into variables. Her fear melted into functions. Her voice, long dismissed and silenced, was speaking through a language they couldn't interrupt. Logic. When she finished the last bracket and hit run, the cursor blinked. A second passed. Then 2, and then results. The algorithm worked perfectly. A few gasps. One audible "no way." "Ms." Crowley's eyes narrowed. Her expression hardened. She pushed up from her desk and stormed over to the screen. "Where did you get this?" she snapped. "Who wrote this for you?" Amara looked at her, not defiantly, not smugly but calmly. "I wrote it," she said. "Miss." Crowley's voice was ice. "You expect me to believe a student who's failing participation just solved a university-level AI pattern problem? I didn't ask you to believe me." Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You asked me to solve it, Miss." Crowley stood frozen for a beat too long, her eyes scanning the output on the screen like it had betrayed her. The code was there, flawless, efficient, elegant, the exact kind of solution that won national coding competitions, not the kind that came from a so-called problem student. "I'm not buying it," she said flatly, stepping between Amara and the computer. "You cheated." Amara blinked. The words didn't sting the way she expected. They sank, slow and heavy, into something deeper. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "I didn't cheat. You saw me write it." "No, Miss," Crowley said, louder this time. Turning to the class, "What you saw was a performance. She must have preloaded this, or memorized someone else's work. There's no way this came from her." "Not her." A hush fell over the room. Amara's hands clenched at her sides. "Please check the code," she said softly. "You can look at the version history. I wrote every line right here." But Ms. Crowley didn't check. Instead, in one swift, sudden movement, she highlighted the entire code and pressed delete. The screen went blank. A gasp swept through the class. Amara took an involuntary step back, like she'd been struck. Problem solved. Miss, Crowley said coldly. Now go to the office, for lying, for cheating, and for disrupting my class. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amara bent down, picked up her backpack, and walked out slowly, with her head up, but inside, something was crumbling. As she stepped into the hallway, the sound of the door shutting behind her echoed louder than any insult. It was the sound of erasure, not just of code but of voice, of effort, of worth. Back in the classroom, the silence was thick. Even the usual troublemakers stayed quiet. A girl in the back, Aaliyah, who rarely spoke, raised her hand slowly. Miss Crowley, what if she really did write it? The teacher's glare silenced her before she could finish. Not another word. The waiting bench outside the principal's office was cold and splintered, its paint chipped from years of restless students shifting under pressure. Amara sat rigid, her backpack clutched like a lifeline against her chest. The hallway was silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional creak of a janitor's cart passing by. Inside the office, muffled voices argued, one sharp and insistent, the other low and weary. Ms. Crowley was speaking rapidly, her words rising and falling with practiced indignation. Academic dishonesty, she insisted. Defiance, disruption. This isn't the first time she's undermined my authority. Amara stared at the frosted glass door, her reflection barely visible in the blur. Her shoulders ached. Her stomach churned with a familiar sense of helplessness, the same one she'd felt when teachers spoke over her, when classmates assumed she was slow, when the world looked at her skin and saw limitations instead of potential. The door creaked open. Principal Howard Mathers stepped out, tall and graying, his suit wrinkled at the elbows. He gave Amara a look that was unreadable, not angry, not kind, just tired. Come in, Miss Johnson. She stood, spine straight despite the ache, and followed him in. Miss Crowley sat already, legs crossed tightly, arms folded across her chest. Her lips curled downward in a practiced scowl. I've heard Miss Crowley's version of the incident. Principal Mathers began as he sank into his chair. Now I'd like to hear yours. Amara's voice came out small. I was asked to solve the problem. Unsolicited. Miss Crowley cut in. I stood because my back hurt. Amara continued, trying to hold her composure. She gave me the code challenge in front of everyone. I didn't cheat. I wrote it line by line. You can check the system. Deleted. Miss Crowley snapped. There's nothing to check. That's not fair, Amara whispered. Fair? Miss Crowley scoffed. Do you think the world will be fair to you? Miss Johnson, if you break rules and expect applause. Principal Mathers held up a hand. Enough. He turned back to Amara. I'll be honest with you, he said. I have no way to verify what you're saying at this moment. And unfortunately, given your prior record of late arrivals and poor class participation, this doesn't reflect well. Amara's chest tightened. So, I'm guilty because I've struggled. Mathers sighed. You'll receive a 3-day suspension pending further review. You'll also be flagged for academic dishonesty. Miss Crowley smiled faintly. The words hit Amara like a punch. She blinked rapidly. Trying not to cry, not here. Not in front of them. Her voice broke, barely audible. No one ever believes me. Mathers looked up, eyes softer for a moment. But he said nothing. He didn't have to. The damage was already done. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, rain streaking the school windows and slow. Deliberate lines like the sky itself was withholding judgment. In the front office of Jefferson STEM Academy, the mood was just as muted. Staff moved quietly. The receptionist offered Amara no more than a glance as she slipped to the waiting area. Cheeks flushed, eyes downcast. She was there to pick up her official suspension notice. But before she could speak to anyone, the front door opened again. Heels clicked on the linoleum floor, calm but purposeful. A woman stepped inside, tall and poised, her umbrella folded precisely at her side. She wore a long black coat, sleek glasses, and a lanyard that read, Dr. Eliza Brooks, Princeton University, Department of Artificial Intelligence. I'm here to speak with Principal Mathers, she said clearly. Amara looked up, her breath caught in her throat. Eliza, she whispered, unsure if she was allowed to believe her eyes. Dr. Brooks turned, and her expression softened the moment she saw the girl. Hello, Amara, she said gently. I got your message. A secretary blinked in confusion. Do you have an appointment? No, Dr. Brooks said without apology. but I believe what I have to share will warrant one. Moments later, the door to the principal's office opened again. Ms. Crowley was already inside, sipping coffee smugly at the conference table. When Dr. Brooks entered, the temperature in the room changed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I understand there's a question about a student's abilities, she began, placing a thin folder on the desk. Let me help clarify that. Principal Mathers blinked. Surprised? And you are Eliza Brooks. I'm a professor of AI and computational systems at Princeton. I've been corresponding with Miss Johnson for over 6 months. Miss Crowley's smirk faltered. Excuse me. She contributes to one of our open source platforms. Her code is tagged under the alias Neural Dream. Her work has been reviewed by my graduate students, and I personally mentored her through a machine learning project earlier this year. She opened the folder. Inside were printouts, email exchanges, screenshots of Amara's GitHub repositories, and time-stamped projects with detailed commentary and pull requests. She didn't cheat. Dr. Brooks said simply. She's gifted. The silence was thunderous. Crowley leaned forward, eyes narrow. Anyone can fake an online profile. Eliza didn't flinch. Anyone can, but not everyone writes code that wins internal review awards at Ivy League research labs. That requires skill, integrity, and vision. Amara has all three. Mathers sat back, stunned. Why didn't we know about this? Amara, standing quietly by the door, spoke for the first time. Her voice was steady. Because no one ever asked, Principal Mathers laced his fingers together, his gaze shifting between Dr. Brooks, Miss Crowley, and Amara, whose presence now seemed far larger than it had the day before. He exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into the silence like a verdict waiting to be spoken. This is quite unexpected, he said finally, looking down at the documents on his desk. But if what you're saying is accurate, Dr. Brooks, then we owe Miss Johnson more than just an apology. We owe her the chance to prove herself fairly. Dr. Brooks nodded. That's all she's ever needed. Miss Crowley bristled. With all due respect, this is highly irregular. A student should not be evaluated based on some internet activity or community projects. Our curriculum has standards, which she apparently exceeds. Dr. Brooks replied without blinking. Amara stood quietly to the side, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't triumphant. She was tired, but something else had begun to burn in her eyes. Resolve. Mathers leaned back in his chair. I propose we conduct an official test. In-house, monitored, a coding assessment designed by our faculty, but reviewed for fairness by an outside party. Fine, Crowley said quickly, but it should be comprehensive. Not just a fluke question she happened to study. Multiple problems, across multiple concepts, algorithms, data structures, recursion, systems logic. Dr. Brooks smiled faintly. Make it as difficult as you like, but give her the same tools and time you would any gifted student. Principal Mathers turned to Amara. Miss Johnson, are you willing to take this exam? Tomorrow morning. No distractions. No external help. Just you and the code. Amara looked up. Her voice was quiet, but unwavering. Yes, sir. I want this for the first time. Miss Crowley said nothing. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Brooks walked alongside Amara through the quiet hallway. Rain tapped against the windows like a ticking clock, counting down to what would either redeem her name or bury it further. You did well in there, Dr. Brooks said. You stayed grounded. I'm scared. Amara admitted. You should be, the professor replied. Tests are scary. But truth isn't. They paused near the exit, where the gray light of morning filtered in through glass doors. Let them test your mind, Amara, Dr. Brooks said softly, but never again let them test your worth. The next morning, the sun rose without promise. Clouds still hung low, and the air outside Jefferson STEM Academy was damp with the memory of last night's rain. Inside, room 307 had been cleared of its usual desks and chatter. In their place sat a single table, a blank laptop, and 2 observers, Principal Mathers and Mr. Kline, the school's IT lead. At precisely 8, Amara walked in. She wore the same hoodie from earlier in the week, but something in her posture had shifted. Her back was straighter, her eyes steady. No trembling hands, no darting glances. If fear remained, it had been buried beneath something more potent purpose. Good morning, Miss Johnson. Principal Mathers greeted her with measured formality. This will be your controlled exam. No internet access. No external tools. The problems were designed by a faculty panel and reviewed for fairness. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside were 6 sheets of paper, 6 programming challenges, ranging from basic data manipulation to advanced AI model logic, each one more complex than the last. The kind of problems normally reserved for college entrance assessments. Miss Crowley had clearly had her hand in designing them. Amara scanned the first sheet, then the second. By the third, a small breath escaped her lips. She wasn't smiling, but she understood exactly what they were trying to do, and that was exactly why she wasn't going to fail. She opened the terminal and began typing. At first, the room was filled only with the sound of keystrokes. Then came the rhythm, the steady, methodical cadence of someone in complete control. Her fingers flowed across the keyboard like they were playing a silent instrument only she could hear. Mr. Klein checked the logs. No outside connections. No saved code. Just her. An hour passed. Then another. Amara worked with relentless focus. For every problem, she built the architecture from scratch. No shortcuts. No reused templates. She commented on her code, explained her logic. On the toughest challenge, an AI classification problem designed to confuse, she didn't just solve it. She offered 2 optimized solutions, one using decision trees, the other a lightweight neural network. Both ran clean. At 10 a.m., Amara closed her laptop and folded her hands. I'm finished. Mathers blinked. All of it. Yes, sir. You still have 58 minutes. I don't need them. Outside the room, word had spread. Students lingered in the hall, whispering, watching. Even some teachers stood nearby, pretending not to listen. Inside, Mathers picked up the laptop with a quiet sense of unease. He'd expected a struggle, hesitation, flaws. What he got was brilliance. As Amara stood to leave, she paused beside the door. If you're still not sure, she said softly, you can run the code yourself. And then she walked out, leaving behind only silence and 6 perfect answers they couldn't erase. By lunchtime, the tension at Jefferson STEM Academy was as thick as the storm clouds still hovering outside. In the administrative wing, 3 printouts of Amara's code lay side by side on the long conference table. One for Principal Mathers, one for Mr. Klein, and the last for the person who had fought hardest to discredit it, Mrs. Crowley. The room was quiet except for the rustle of pages as they read. No one spoke. Not at first. Line by line, Amara's solutions unfolded elegant logic, structured design, comments written with clarity and confidence. There were no signs of plagiarism, no telltale inconsistencies or cut-and-paste artifacts. The code wasn't just correct. It was distinctive, the mark of someone who understood, not just memorized. Principal Mathers leaned back slowly in his chair. She didn't just complete the exam. He said, she surpassed it. Mr. Klein nodded. Her solutions aren't just technically accurate, they're inventive. The neural net implementation on question 6 is something I'd expect from an undergrad with industry experience. Miss Crowley said nothing. Her fingers were rigid around her pen. She stared at the page, not reading anymore, just staring, as if hoping the lines of code would rearrange into something she could dismiss. She must have been coached, she muttered finally. It's too polished. Of course she was coached. Dr. Brooks's voice cut in from the doorway. She stepped inside, arms folded calmly. That's what mentorship is. That's what school is supposed to be. Crowley flinched. She didn't cheat. Heather. Brooks continued. She grew, she learned, she worked. The real question is, why did you expect her to fail? Mathers sighed, pushing the pages forward. I think we're done pretending. Amara Johnson has more than earned her place. Crowley rose suddenly. So that's it. She embarrasses me publicly, and we reward her with praise. Dr. Brooks tilted her head. She didn't embarrass you. You did that all by yourself. The silence that followed was final. At that moment, in the hallway outside, Amara sat on the windowsill, watching the clouds shift. She didn't know what was being said inside. She didn't know whether her truth had finally landed. But she felt lighter, not because she had proven them wrong, because she had proven herself right. That evening, long after most students had gone home, the Jefferson School Board convened in the auditorium under flickering lights and rising tension. Word of Amara's story had spread beyond the halls through emails, whispered conversations, and now even the local news. The community had gathered, teachers, parents, reporters with cameras rolling. And in the front row, Amara sat between her mother, still in her scrubs from the hospital, and Dr. Brooks, calm and composed beside her. At exactly 6:00 p.m., Board President Lorraine Pierce called the session to order. Tonight, we address a matter that goes beyond a single test or a single teacher. She said, we address the integrity of our system and whether it sees the brilliance in every child or only in those it expects brilliance from. One by one, people approached the microphone. Dr. Brooks spoke first, detailing Amara's independent projects, the hours of mentorship, and the platforms where her code had been used in real-world applications. Her intelligence is not a miracle. She concluded, it's what happens when talent meets opportunity, and she had to fight for that opportunity. Then came Mr. Kleiner, the IT lead, who had reviewed her code. What she built wasn't just correct, it was elegant. She sees patterns like no one her age should. That kind of mind doesn't come from cheating. It comes from discipline. Next, a surprised voice, Zachary Green, one of Amara's classmates, stood awkwardly at the mic. I laughed at her, he admitted, because it was easier than standing up. I saw how Crowley treated her. We all did, and none of us said anything. A hush swept the room. Finally, Amara's mother stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My daughter comes home every night tired, not from sports, not from drama club, but from fighting to be seen. And when she finally showed her gift, someone tried to erase it. That is not education. That is erasure. Applause broke out, uncontainable this time. President Pierce looked across the board and then directly at Ms. Crowley, seated stiffly to the side. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and Ms. Johnson's exceptional exam performance, we find no grounds for any accusation of misconduct. In fact, we find grave fault in how this situation was handled. She paused, her voice harder now. Effective immediately. Miss Crowley is placed on administrative leave pending formal investigation, and this board is enacting immediate policy reforms, including a zero-tolerance stance on educator bias, the creation of a student-led reporting system, and the foundation of a mentorship initiative for underserved talent. The crowd rose to its feet, and Amara, for the first time, didn't shrink from the attention. She stood tall, not as the girl who had been accused, but as the young woman who had changed the very system that tried to silence her. 1 week later, Jefferson STEM Academy looked the same on the outside brick walls. Metal lockers, students drifting from one class to the next. But inside, something had shifted. Conversations in the teacher's lounge now included words like bias, mentorship, and recognition. Posters began appearing in the hallways. Talent has no template. We rise when all are seen. Amara walked through those halls quietly, her hoodie still pulled low. But now it wasn't to hide, it was comfort. Students she barely knew now greeted her with cautious nods or whispered, "That was you." Right. Teachers who once overlooked her now made space, eye contact, and room for her voice. But Amara didn't chase fame. She built. At Dr. Brooks's encouragement, she launched a lunchtime club called Code Equity, a safe space for students from underrepresented backgrounds to learn, collaborate, and experiment without judgment. At first, only 3 students showed up, then 10, then 30. One girl admitted she had always wanted to try programming, but thought it wasn't for people like her. Another student, a boy with a stutter, found his confidence in algorithms, not spoken words. Amara didn't lecture. She guided. She shared her scars, her struggles, her methods. She made sure every student who sat in that room knew one thing: they belonged here. Meanwhile, the administration honored its promises. A new mentorship program paired talented students with university-level mentors. Staff underwent training on implicit bias and inclusive instruction. And Ms. Crowley's absence was never openly discussed, but her door remained shut, and her name faded like a story no one wanted to reread. One afternoon, Principal Mathers visited Amara's club. He watched quietly from the doorway as she helped a student debug a messy loop. When she finally noticed him, she stood hesitant. "I just wanted to say," he said, clearing his throat, "thank you for staying, for fighting. You've helped this school become what it should have always been." Amara smiled, small but real. "Like, I didn't mean to change anything. I just wanted to write code." He chuckled. "Sometimes, the quietest lines rewrite the biggest systems." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds. 3 months later, Amara stood in front of a packed auditorium, not as a student, But as the keynote speaker for the district's New Voices of Innovation Youth Symposium, her palms were sweating, and her heart pounded like it had that day in room 214. But this time, no one was trying to break her. They had come to listen. She stepped to the microphone. The lights dimmed. Silence settled. I never wanted to be a symbol, she began, voice steady. I just wanted to be understood. She paused. I come from a place where code became my voice, where logic made more sense than people, where silence wasn't weakness, it was safety. But sometimes, silence lets wrong things grow. She glanced down, then back up, her gaze direct now. Calm, unshakable. When I was accused of cheating, it wasn't just my work that was erased. It was my voice, my value, my right to be believed. And if Dr. Brooks hadn't stepped in, I might have stayed erased. She looked around the room, students, teachers, administrators, community leaders. So I'm here now, not because I won, but because I was seen, and every student quiet, loud, struggling, thriving deserves that. Not just a second chance, a first real one. Thunderous applause. Later that evening, as she walked the empty halls of Jefferson one last time before summer break, Amara stopped at room 214. The door was open now. Inside, Mr. Patel, the new computer science teacher, had decorated the room with posters that read, "Code without fear and every voice builds the future." On the far wall, a framed quote stood in bold black letters. It read, "They tried to delete her. Instead, she debugged the system." Amara smiled, touched her fingers lightly to the words, then turned and walked away. This time, she wasn't walking out in shame. She was walking into her future. They tried to erase her. They tried to silence her, but she didn't raise her voice. She raised her code, and with every line she wrote, she proved something louder than words, that brilliance can come from the quietest corners, and no system built on judgment can survive the truth forever. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments, like, share, and subscribe to support real stories that deserve to be heard.